lived experience in social justice advocacy is a three-part series: my story, how I work to change a law, and how you can change a law. Take care of yourself while viewing this content. It includes discussing child sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and sex trafficking. This can be difficult for any viewer. If you become overwhelmed, pause the tape, take a break, and refocus. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't believe it. What do you see in this picture? A mom, a dad, and 3 little girls, all dressed up in matching outfits. I remember it. It was pink polka-dotted Swiss, and my mother had handmade all of the outfits. That's me right there with my father's hand around my waist. The truth is, a photograph is just a snapshot in time. The reality is, we lived in horror. My name is Rhonda, and I grew up in the middle of 3 girls. My older sister was 17 months older than me, and my younger sister was 5 years younger than me. The best way to describe my parents and us is that we were collateral damage. Their hatred for each other was more important than their love for us. When they met, my father was 26, my mother 17, and she became pregnant. She was forced to marry him. After my sister was born, I came along just 17 months later. My earliest memories of childhood are fights, knives, blood, police. There was a time when my father had us for the weekend and we were meeting at a park in Alvin, Texas. And so we were supposed to move from my dad over to my mom and we were going to go home, but they got into a fight. And when they got into a fight, my dad grabbed us, threw us in his truck, and took off. My mom jumped in her car and started chasing. And we were speeding, one car following the other one, all the way around Alvin until my dad accidentally went onto a dead-end street. And so he maneuvered his vehicle to where it was like crossing the road trying to turn around. And here came my mom in her car, and she rammed his truck. He proceeded to jump out of the truck and was worried about his truck. It was only until I was an adult that I looked back on that story and realized that my mom rammed the vehicle with us 3 little girls in there. During these fights between my parents, my dad would always take me. I was in the middle of my sisters and I would freeze when they would fight. On these visits, we would be gone a month, 3 months, even up to 1 year. I remember it was the first time that I was sexually assaulted in the 3rd grade, and it was 2 boys behind a fence in the apartment complex where I lived with my dad. While I was living with my dad, one night he wanted to go out. And so he took me to a movie theater. And he took me to this movie theater, and I still remember, I'm going to age myself when I share, it was the movie The Cat from Outer Space. And so my dad told the people at the movie theater that my mom was inside. And so I went into the movie theater, and I watched the movie, and when I came out, no one came to pick me up. There was this restaurant in the greater Houston area, and it was called Kip Big Boys, and it was right next to the movie theater. A man walked over and asked me if I needed help. He took me from the movie theater, and he took me over to Kip Big Boys, and he got me a hot chocolate. And we sat there for a very long time until I could remember my grandmother's phone number. And I called my grandmother, and she came and picked me up. That story has always been special to me because as a child, that's one person that showed me kindness. And I don't even know who he is. In 1981, I met the worst of my attackers. I was 10 years old. I was visiting my dad at his apartment complex, and he came up to the pool and asked me if I wanted to be a model. After a very short conversation with me, he talked to my parents, and they gave him approval. He would come and pick me up from Fort Bend County and take me into Houston. That happened for a while before I was flown. I was taken from Houston Intercontinental Airport, and I was flown to Lubbock. Right near when the abuse happened, my mother found out what happened to us. And what she said was that we were never to talk about it. She told me that she would have him killed, which we knew was a lie. But for the next 21 years, I stayed silent. I did the best to live my life and moved on the best I could. 21 years later, I was grocery shopping in Walmart, and I came across another man that attacked me as a child. I walked up to him and I asked him if he was who I knew he was. And I told him, my name is Rhonda, and I am my mother's daughter. And his face went white, and he said, "You're getting me confused with my brother." And so he went to walk and leave the grocery store. I remember thinking I needed to get out before him, but he walked to the grocery store checkout lane, and so did I, and he left before me. I stood there as a grown adult with a cart full of groceries and paralyzed. I could not leave that store. I remember thinking if I walked out into the parking lot, when I scanned, I wouldn't know where he was. And then all of these emotions of being so frustrated and upset with myself because I had worked so hard to get over this. And here I was, of no fault of my own, with all of it coming back again. And I knew I had to do something. After I went home, about a week later, I got a phone call from my mother saying she was going to a funeral. And I said, "Who died?" And she said, "This man that I confronted in Walmart. He had committed suicide." I told my mom what happened to me with him, and it was literally like 3 seconds. And her words I will remember for the rest of my life. She said to me, "It had nothing to do with you. He lost his job. His wife left him. I'm going to the funeral in support of his family." I remember sitting there thinking inside, but I'm your family. And so after the confrontation and the suicide, I knew I had to do something. And so I decided to go to the police. And just like my personality, I made a checklist: meet with my sisters, meet with my mom, meet with my dad, schedule an appointment with a counselor. And I did all of that. I walked into the Pasadena Police Department and made a report. And it was that day that we found out so my trafficker would send his victims home with mementos. I received a scrapbook that the inside cover was "Love You Pumpkin" with his name. I also had my plane ticket that was used for me to be flown from Intercontinental to Lubbock. The other thing that I had, and this is how we found him, there was a heart that I had. And this heart was because I was a minor on an airplane. The trafficker filled out all of his information. It was that day that I found out that he has been convicted 4 times, 3 different states. He was convicted in Texas, Kansas, California, and back in Texas in 1991. His charges include compelling prostitution, sexual performance by a child, aggravated sexual assault. It's really important to note that all of these charges are related to trafficking, but back then, that terminology didn't exist. On that day, though, I found out that I was past what was called a statute of limitations. That is a time limit for victims to be able to come forward and report a crime and for that crime to be charged. So way back then, child sexual assault had a 10 years from your 18th birthday statute of limitations, which meant that as a victim, if you waited until you were 29 years old, you were too late and nothing could be done. I was 34, so I was 6 years too late. The next thing I was told is that there would be a possibility that I could toll the statute of limitations. That meant that if I reported the crime within the statute of limitations, I could go forward. So for about the next 5 to 6 months, I looked for ways to toll the statute of limitations. And I found it. I found hospital records where his name is listed, where we told doctors what happened to us. I found court records where my parents were fighting for custody of my younger sister. We told court officials his name and what he did to us. There were also CPS records where CPS had visited our house. But for all of it, we fell through the cracks. Nothing was done with any of these records. And I was told by the Lubbock Police Department that this wasn't enough to toll the statute of limitations. It was in the middle of the night one night when I woke up, I couldn't sleep, and these words came to me: 4 victims. Their signs are fear, mistrust, aggression, drug addiction, and prostitution. With every misdeed that they commit, it only reaffirms their belief that they were to blame from the very beginning. Those who are able must be their voice. No victim should ever be told that they can't come forward if there is evidence. So I figured, what could I do? I knew what a tough time I was going through trying to heal. So what I decided to do is I decided to change a law. I wanted to abolish the statute of limitations for child sexual assault. So join me next time to learn how I took a lived experience and turned it into social justice advocacy.